YouTube, hello. Subscribe and all that crap. So we're going to have a more reviewing today. I'm going to carry on with this posed chain of reviews of my favorite books. Um, Specifically favorite books that like need a little bit of a sort of push, i.e., the authors are alive. Generally speaking, I could talk about Lord of the Rings, but I'm not going to. Um, Before I get on to the book we're going to talk about today, which is Senlin Ascends and the Books of Babel by Josiah Bancroft, uh, a number of book-related stuff items to talk about. So the first of which is that I said I was going to give away to a subscriber on this channel this copy of Emperor of Thorns from Broken Binding with a Jorg story in it called The Bigger Bastard. And yeah, lovely thing. And you can get King of Thorns off them as well. And you'd have to go hunting for Prince of Thorns because that's sold out. And I did a random draw from the big list of subscribers. And the 720th subscriber was Callum Auckland, who has won this. Fortunately, he doesn't live in Auckland, which makes the postage a bit cheaper. I have been sent a bunch of arts advanced reviewer copies of books. The first of which is this one, very shiny, and the title is When the Moon Hatched, and based purely on the blurb, it seems to be sort of sexy times with dragons and um, very much in the Fourth Wing vein, which has been hugely successful. In this book doesn't need any sort of hype from me because it's selling much better than I am. I think it's got like came out this year and it's got well over 20,000 ratings on Goodreads already. So um, there you go. I will be giving this to somebody who wants it at some point. I don't think it's a book I'm going to read. And to emphasize how well it's doing, I had just noticed that Senlin Ascends, the book I was going to talk about today, has passed 30,000 reviews on Goodreads, which is very impressive. And given that when I first picked it up, it had spent 3 years getting 50 ratings on Goodreads, to have now passed 30,000 is very good. But it's taken 10 years to do it, and the book I just showed you has done 2/3 of that in just a few months. Another arc I've been sent is Blood over Brighthaven by M.L. Wang, who you may recall was an SBFBO champion with The Sword of Kaigan, which is a really excellent book. So I'm looking forward to reading this. And I think this was self-published, did very well, and then Wang has signed up with a publisher. I can't immediately see with my eyesight, Del Rey, and I think it's coming out in hardback in October. So I'm keen to read this. I'm told by lots of people it's very good. And then the one that arrived today is this chap with all the shiny writing on it. Um, there is a secret part of London hardly anyone knows is there. If this London is what they call the smoke, then that place is the fire, which gives me vibes of Neverwhere, which I've just read by Neil Gaiman. But this one, it's got the proper cover underneath, is The Great When by Alan Moore. And Alan Moore, of course, is mega famous. I first knew him because he wrote for my favorite comic when I was a lad, 2000 AD. I'd say a lad, I kind of kept on reading it for another 30 or 40 years. But I started getting that comic when it first came out in 1977. And he's like the brain behind stories that became made into films. I think generally speaking against his will, like The Watchmen and V for Vendetta and all of these League of Gentlemen. He's got an extraordinary imagination and is a fine writer, but I've never read a book by him, so I'm going to read that. I'm still working my way through this, almost finished. Very weird book, literary fiction, intriguing. I will review it in due course. And then after that, it's the current SBFBO champion for me. Anyway, we're here to talk about Senlin Ascends and the other books in the series. So it starts off with Senlin Ascends, and I really like the cover art. I neglected to memorize who the artist is, but it's a personal friend of Josiah's, and he was able to keep him on once he got his publishing deal. So he's done the covers for all of those. And the next book, The Arm of the Sphinx, and then I've got the other two in paperback, the Hod King, and finishing up with The Fall of Babel. So why do I like these books so much? I'm not going to tell you the plot and all of that sort of stuff. People read for different reasons, and I really like good prose, and I like good characters, and I'm pleased if there's a good plot. I mean, obviously, in a book, we want to have everything being excellent, but there are definitely people who, a lot of readers, practically the majority of readers, who don't really care about the prose and maybe even don't care that much about the characters and are just plot readers. And plot readers are a very different creature from prose readers, for example. You will hear, I mean, it's the honest truth that a lot of people don't actually understand what these words mean. You will see, because as soon as because writing readerships are quite tribal and they like to sort of fight among each other and say this person's better or that person's better, they will latch on to terms like character driven, and because in their mind these terms are unalloyed good, they will attempt to attach them to the books they like and say that the books they don't like don't have these things. Whereas the honest truth is, in many cases, they don't know what those words mean really, but they do like this book and they don't like that book, and they can't properly articulate why, so they've bandied these terms around. And I mean, I like plot. Plot's great. I read a Sanderson book, the first Mistborn book. I forget the title of it. And at the start, I was thinking, well, I'm not really sure what people see in this guy. There were the prose was good, but fairly flat, and the characters were, they were interesting. But the plot, once I started to get towards past the halfway mark and then towards the end, the way all of the elements came together, they call it the Sanderlanche, where everything speeds up, everything focuses down, and it becomes super exciting. And I hugely enjoyed that, and I ended up giving the book a 5 stars. So I can appreciate that plot is something that gets people very excited. But when I'm reading, I want it to be there, but it's not the main thing. I like the writing to be beautiful. I like the characters to be unique and intriguing. I don't need to have them be characters where I want to be mates with them, or characters where I imagine one of them is my boyfriend slash girlfriend, or characters who are, always do the right thing, well, moral and good. Just need them to be interesting. And this is not a minority interest. We've seen the success of, say, Breaking Bad, massive success, and Walter White is not a good character. Not he's a great character, but he is not morally good. Although he's not wholly evil either, he is like real people. He's a mix of different things going on. Um, he has things that he loves, things that he will sacrifice for one thing. So, Senlin Ascends. What drew me to this immediately was just the quality of the writing. And again, this is the prose. The prose is like a flavor, you know. It's some people will like curries, and some people will like, I don't know, olives. Some people want very bland food. Some people want very spicy food. So, you know, there's no objective right or wrong with prose, but there is a statistical agreement, shall we say, on these things. And again, it's used as a people talk about good writing and bad writing, and again, it's used as a sort of um, weapon in this battle of almost political opinion about authors, where we see now because Pat Rothfuss and George Martin have set a large number of people simply by being unable to produce the next book in their series within a decade. I now see all these people sort of banding around the idea that they are both bad writers. And it's clearly just an expression of their frustration with the situation, their disapproval. Because, you know, if you go back, like when these next books seemed imminent, people weren't calling them bad writers. They weren't saying the writing they do is bad. And it hasn't become bad in the last few years, but people are much more likely to say, I mean, obviously there would be some people who didn't like it back then and don't like it now, but I feel that the great swell that I'm seeing of people calling them bad writers is more of a manifestation of their dissatisfaction with the delays, and then just taking these terms and using them as weapons. But back to Josiah, who is produced these books very promptly and is a great writer, great in terms of prose. He's great in many other regards as well, but he is a monstrously fine prose writer. And again, it won't be to everyone's taste, but I feel this is something that most people who read these books agree that the guy can write your socks off. He's got a sort of poet's sensibility without filling the pages with poetry, because no one wants to read page after page of poetry. But if you're a prose reader, you want to have the language flex its muscles and to be able to say more with less, and you want to be able to see just one line and say, wow, he's nailed that. It might be a description, it might be an idea, it might be just trying to strike a chord in the reader's head, so to say we've experienced the same thing, and somehow by just using 10 words or 12 or whatever, he has made that connection because he's chosen the right ones in a very evocative way. He's also tremendously witty, so he's got this sense of humor, and he's got this intelligence, this humorous intelligence that can shine through in his prose. So yeah, that is the headline for me, that these books are wonderfully well written. On a line by line version, the prose is magnificent for me. Character wise and setting are also major stars that he's chosen this character. So in the first book, it's just a single point of view. Thomas Senlin, who's a school teacher, he's off to the Tower of Babel, which is this incredibly tall tower at the center of the continent or the land that he lives in. And he's a very provincial type, and he's taking his wife with him. And he thinks he knows it all, and he finds out that he doesn't. But what makes him such a fascinating character is, I guess, the way in which he is challenged by his journey. So the way in which his expectations and his self-opinion and his opinion of others is constantly being changed. What makes him a nice character is that he will allow it to be changed, but not just on a flick of a switch, but through the pressures that are exerted on him, through the truths that he's exposed to, he changes by degrees, and in a way in which we can feel sympathetic with. That we all are reluctant to admit that we're wrong, but it's entertaining to see him slowly reevaluate everything he knew. And I see people who review this and go, "Oh, I didn't like it because I didn't like Senlin." And everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I don't feel it's the point of the book. You're not necessarily meant to like him because he's pompous and he's opinionated and he's somewhat narrow-minded at the start, and that doesn't vanish. Even by the end of the book, by the end of the series, maybe he's a completely changed character. But it's simply he is a great character to interact with this world, and he meets lots of other characters who he interacts with, and the distinct characters that come and butt heads create these many interesting situations. If you have all these sort of fairly bland, generic characters who interact, then it's left to the plot to do all of the interesting because the characters in themselves aren't. But here, it's not the case that there's no plot, but I could almost just watch these people meet and have conversations and interact, and I wouldn't need a plot because they are so interesting, and the ways they interact and the way they butt up against each other is very interesting. It's no spoiler to say that Tom Senlin and his wife become separated very early in this book, and a lot of essentially the driving force of the book is him searching for her in this Tower of Babel, which is a massive place with each story of the thing essentially being a kingdom. And I've seen people looking at the first book and going, "Oh, this is somewhat sexist because he's hunting his wife, and his wife gets no role to play, and we don't even see her again." But later in the series, this changes, and we do get to see her point of view as well, and a lot of other characters, many of them female. And in The Arm of the Sphinx, things broaden. We get several more point of view characters, all of whom are great, and everything sort of broadens out. We get a much bigger and better view of the tower. In the first book, we were only really looking at the very lowest levels, and this is possibly my favorite of the series. It's also got a huge library in it near the end, which may have inspired me to write about libraries or not. I don't know. The Hod King, book 3, carries on in this vein with multiple characters interacting, and has some very emotional moments, some very surprising moments. It's one of the skills Bancroft brings, is that he can combine humor and tragedy and drama and do all these things very hard on the heels of each other. So I was actually reading this on a bus, sat next to an incredibly pungent man who the smell of whom was bringing tears to my eyes, but so did the book. I was sort of reading it, and I was in this sort of exciting, fun section, and I was, essentially laughing on the inside because I couldn't laugh in public. And then very next, literally turn the page, and now I'm struggling not to cry. So you sort of visit emotional highs and lows in this, and it's just a tremendous book. I think maybe I don't know where it's hard to place this one in the thing, but it's certainly as good as all the ones that came before. And finally, we have the Fall of Babel, which closes it all off and is probably the longest of the four books. Um, Now, this was my least favorite of the four, but I still think it's an excellent book. And I think there's a tendency when people read series to judge every book in that series by the one that came before. So, like if you'd given book one 5 stars and you didn't like book two as much, you might give it 4 stars without realizing that if you just come to book two out of the blue, you'd think, oh my God, this is a great book. I'll give it 5 stars. But no, people sort of go, "Ooh, well, if it wasn't as good as the one I've given 5 stars, I have to give it lower," and I don't subscribe to that point of view. Um, this book, it wasn't as good as the three that came before, but I'd still give it 5 stars all day long because it still contains great writing. It still has many exciting things, and it brings everything to a close that was interesting and had a degree of sophistication to it. It wasn't sort of everyone wins and they're all happy ever after. There was some bittersweet and some ambiguity, um, but I thought it was well done. So the quadrilogy, I can 100% recommend. Um, it's just one of the best series out there, and the fact that the first book. So when I came to it, it had I can't remember what it had, sort of 50 ratings, and during the course of the SPFBO and when I was talking about it, it got up to about 1,500 ratings, and it still had an average of about 4.5, which is monstrously high. On 30,000 ratings, I think the average is there's a thing called Goodreads droop. Well, I call it Goodreads droop, which is the more readers a book has, the average score is just going to trail off. It's going to droop. So you start off and the people who are reading the book either feel they're part of some sort of special elite because they're the early adopters and so they may be encouraged to give a higher value, higher scores, or they are just the sort of people who hunt out new books and more enthusiastic, maybe they're bloggers. And so you tend to see the higher score at the start, and then if you and I've charted this for my books that you start off at whatever you start off at, and after 1,000 ratings, you'll have dropped by a certain amount, and that drop will keep on going for the next 10,000, but it'll be slowing down. And then from probably the next 30,000 after that, it will continue to drop, but very, very slowly as you're bringing in all of these people who are only there because somebody has pushed them into it or talked them into it, or the hype has sucked them into it. And they are more reluctant readers and less sort of people who would have heard what the book was about and just gone for it on that basis alone without any encouragement. And so they have a natural tendency to rate lower because it's not they're not quite so squarely in the focus of this book, and it carries on and carries on. But the Senlin Ascends is now on 4.12, and even taking into account and literary books always score less well than YA books. YA books with their younger readers, they've had less time to sort of grow uh, jaded, I guess, and everything's new to them, and they're thinking every author that does something, wow, that author's a genius. How did they possibly think to do that? When sort of somebody who's been reading for 40 years says, oh, this guy's just doing this thing that I've seen 10 times before. All with which to say that there are many reasons why that score is not low, but 4.12 is not like a sort of Sanderson book or whatever 4.5s you see on these things. The fact that it's there and not at sort of 4.5 and 4.6 just illustrates the divergence between my personal taste and the general public, because I give it 5 all day long, and whenever I see anyone who doesn't give it 5, I'm going, why? And that's just a failure of my own imagination to put myself in the shoes of people who don't like it. But to conclude, all I can do is suggest you give it a try. I think it's a very fine book. I'm going to say goodbye and catch you next time.